Anyhow, so what I
Yeah.
can tell is that we have open positions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it should be. Yeah, you should have a lot of candidates, potential
And
candidates.
we
Yeah.
now know we had election, and now we know who the government will be, and
Yeah.
we know even since yesterday their program plans. So I
Oh,
believe
wow.
it will be safe to for everyone to come. And even though climate change will receive less attention than before, but it's still existent in the minds of our politicians. So yeah. Anyhow, but I think this was really thanks for the feedback because it's you hear many things and lots of things that we kind of realized.
Yeah, I think that it's still a very important issue. And, yeah, and so I really appreciate your presenting today. And,
I will.
uh,
Should I share my screen and
yeah, yeah,
maybe?
I'll do a quick
Very
intro.
good.
I'll
Do
do a
that.
quick introduction, and then by then I think we'll have more people coming. I'm going to record on my computer also. Kim may even put it on YouTube. I don't know. He likes to do it sometimes, but we'll at least share it with the group, and I'll share just I'm going to like th 3 minutes, and then I'm going to because I don't want
Uh,
too much.
Absolutely, of course.
So here's so yeah, so thank you all so much for coming today. We have some new people. I do an introduction, but I don't want to cut into any time, so we can definitely have some more discussion in later meetings. In about 4 weeks, we're going to have more of an open discussion. But today, we're so glad to hear from Dr. Peter Boor, but thank you so much to you all for coming today. We have some new faces, and there are some people who let me know that they couldn't make it and want to hear the recording. So, um, I want to say that in 2 weeks, Alessandro Gambella is going to present mainly on a steatosis assessment publication. So, not kidney. So, this is the Banff Digital Pathology Working Group. So we're interested in all organs, but most usually are kidney. And then in 4 weeks, Zelko Javanchek, hopefully I got his name correctly, is going to present on his remote digital pathology practice. He's at the Hennepin County Medical Center in Minnesota, but I believe he does a lot of his work from Florida. So that's going to be really interesting. And then in basically in 6 weeks, we're going to continue. And I know this is taking a long time, but we have this survey that we've done, and we're still analyzing the data on that, which just went to the digital pathology working group. But it's going to eventually we're going to create a wider audience survey like we did for a prior publication. And then I think we're going to start a Delphi process to kind of establish some sort of benchmarks. I think that Jesper Kurz had mentioned that we need to do more, especially for the image bank, to try to see how we can build an image bank. And a lot of the survey dealt with that. Um, and then basically in early June, Dr. Kim Solis is going to present. He had a really interesting, sort of debate in India with Agnes Fogo, and then he represented that to Alberta. So he's going to talk about that, but he was saying today that he may also talk about some of the recent issues that we were kind of touching on. So much is changing in the world. But I just want to thank you all for coming, and let me know if any of you want to present, if you have work, or if you know of someone who does, and we'll definitely set them up because we're basically open in the summer. But now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Peter Boor. I thank him so much for presenting. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Brad. I will try to share my screen and start the presentation. Do you now see it in the correct modes?
Yes, it looks good. Yeah, looks
Looks
good.
good. Perfect. Okay, thank you. So today I wanted to talk about something that started to interest us because when we think about broad implementation of AI in pathology, we do a lot of stuff in pathology, and broadly implementing it would also mean that it might have some ecological consequences. And we actually came out this because as we're developing a lot of AI tools in our own lab, and we realized how much how much electricity we kind of burn at a certain point. And this brought us to this question. So maybe in a very short excursion to our university clinic. So this is not a refinery or something. This is really university clinic in Aachen. Please visit us if you like. I heard, I don't use TikTok, but I heard that on TikTok there is a top 10 of most ugliest university clinics in the world, and our university clinic made it to the top 10. And of course, pathology is in the cellar and back of the university clinic. So I'm here at -2 speaking out there. But you see, although I'm at -2, I still see some daylight sometimes. Okay, so AI in pathology, that's and AI in general. Um, I think it follows the classical hype cycle for any emerging technologies. You perhaps know this. And I believe that for AI, we are still somewhere here at peak of inflated expectations. And for every technology, there comes kind of lots of the valleys of disillusionment, and then lots of work that has to be done to make the technology productive. And I actually also think that we know this from all other technologies. So I ask myself, why not start thinking about these challenges already here so that we don't have to, run into the valley of disillusionment? And there are lots of challenges which are currently not being tackled or only partly tackled. Explainability, transparency, legal issues, ethics, security. And the one that I want to talk about a little bit more today is sustainability, and even that only from the perspective of ecological sustainability. So just one very small aspect of lots of issues that we should actually think about in the future to make this work. So this is actually one of the pictures that made me switch to this, and this is a funny picture you can Google actually, and you will find this. This is the citation to that, and this was kind of the carbon footprint of human life, and this is also interesting. Sorry, guys, I think many of you are from the US, so it seemed, but this was actually done at MIT, so it comes from the US, and this is American life. And then this was kind of the carbon footprint of a neural network. So that you can see that that makes a huge, huge difference. And the second thing is that the world is getting digital, and we are simply increasingly producing data. And I actually didn't know what zeta is. I had to look it up. So we are now getting into zeta, and probably this will not stop there because, see the trend. It doesn't even seem to be linear. So we are increasingly producing data. And the other thing is that if you look who is producing the data mostly, then actually healthcare is the leading area that produces most data currently. So of course, this brought us to the question, what are the consequences of deep learning if in pathology? Because first of all, with digital pathology, we start to produce huge amounts of data that haven't been there before. And then applying deep learning on that also requires huge computational resources. So we thought about let's have a look if we would do this, what carbon footprint we would produce. So what we did a very detailed analysis of the workflow that we had. And this is the study I already presented here. So, but I wanted to very shortly show it to you because the basis for the second study. So we understood very in detail our processes, exact numbers of slides we process per year, per specimen, how big the specimens are, how much data we have. And then we ran various deep learning models on these exact slides to understand how much electricity we need for that. And then, of course, we calculated how much carbon footprint we have because we know where the electricity comes from. And you see, unfortunately, Germany is very ungreen in its energy resource. So we had very little renewable energy sources at the moment. We then look at various deep learning models and also scenarios. So actually, currently, we already use deep learning. Many pathologies use deep learning, one task in one disease, for example, prostate cancer. This has already been used, but it's very likely that we will have scenarios where we use different deep learning tools, 2 or maybe 7 tasks. If you now think about breast cancer, so we already use 5 AIs because we automatically analyze all the biomarkers, yeah, ER, PR, HR2, Ki67, and mitosis count. So these are 5 deep learning running on the same slide even. And then we thought about one thing, and I think many people talk about this. It's a huge excitement about large language models and models that can answer you every question you give it. So we also thought about, okay, maybe better than 7 tasks could be one large model that can tackle many tasks at the same time, and therefore we calculated this as well. But then we try to extrapolate what we calculate exactly for our center, for Germany, world, and the future. And the more extrapolation, the less granular it is because we have less and less reliable data. And then we also already start to think what could be the solutions to reduce the CO2. So first thing, deep learning models, and we just took some very shallow, easy models, some medium size, and some state-of-the-art larger models. You see here the number of parameters. And here you actually see logarithmic scale of carbon footprint, how much these models produce CO2 if you run them. So it's not for training. And then actually we took Palm as a large model, as an example of a large model, because back then this was the one that could process images, and we extrapolated approximately based on the parameters what his carbon footprint could be. So you see here the gap. That's a huge difference here. What makes a big difference is which hardware you use, and what is mostly important for me is that currently in our university clinic we will be the first one who are buying a GPU to run the models. So at the moment we only have CPUs for clinical routine practice. This is also because no one had to do AI on images, but you see using CPUs doesn't make sense. So you really need to have GPUs, and even there it's a big difference which you use to make this more efficient. But for GPUs, again, this is logarithmic, so even this is a big change. But at least having GPUs is very, very important. So these are already the data for our center. And I just want to show you this one because this is the large model that if we would use, this is the amount of CO2 which we would produce per year. So if we would run one large model on each single slide, then we would produce 2,800 tons of CO2 per year. Just one AI on one slide in our institute. We don't have that much forest around Aachen, so this would need 30% of the forest here to sequester per year. So, and that's just our institute. Okay, so that's kind of ridiculous amount of CO2 if you think about this. However, if you look at that, this is again logarithmic scale. So if you start thinking about it, using small models makes a huge difference. This is 100-fold, 1,000-fold difference. So I believe this is something which we should think about more. So we then extrapolated for Germany, and again you see this huge increase from using single smaller deep learning networks, even 7 of them. It's still much less than using one large model that is multitask. And if we would use that, we would produce 400 kilotons of CO2 in Germany. We calculated how much slides we produce in Germany approximately. And worldwide, it would be, again, extrapolation with it. So this is really less granular, but yeah, you get to megatons of CO2 just by running AI on histology. So then we did even something else. We tried to extrapolate, how this can develop over time by calculating deep learning models, because they're still getting bigger and and larger. This is not yet going the other way around. So the development goes bigger, bigger, and bigger. I think this is even, also in the US, the idea of having these large data centers and producing even larger models. The devices can actually counter it. So if we would have more efficient devices, we could reduce this. But there we get to the level where the hardware cannot anymore be more efficient. So this has a intrinsic limitation. Only if we will devise maybe completely new approaches, maybe quantum computation or neuromorphic computation could be a solution, but that doesn't exist really yet. Computation, so neuromorphic not at all, and quantum just starts to appear. And then, of course, the major issue is where you get your energy. So theoretically, if we would be able to produce 100% renewable carbon-free energy, then everything would be good. But at least for Germany, even until 2050, the projections are really poor. So it's unlikely that we will get to full green energy within the next 20, 30 years. At least at the moment, this seems very unlikely, and therefore it's very relevant to try to tackle this. And then we also calculated cases, right? So I do believe that generally we will likely be, we will get more cases than less. But at the end, this didn't really make a big difference if you look at that. So anyhow, if you think about Germany, then if you think about the worst scenario, the models, we would use the largest models, we would have CPUs, or well, actually we use not that good GPUs. We would use actually the planned development of energy, and we would get some more cases, which is the case, then we would produce more CO2 than Germany's forest by June 2027. And even in an average scenario, we will get to amount of CO2 that Germany forest can sequester by 2045 approximately. However, the important thing is that if we kind of, we try to tackle this from the beginning, right? We use the best devices, we use the best deep learning. Probably this will not be realistic, but we could potentially minimize it and even reduce it for the future. So the main message for me, or the hope, is the blue line, that if we start thinking about it now, we can make it happen. We can use AI and even continuously decrease the CO2, and that also means reduce the computational requirements. So for the world, the only difference is world has still a little bit more forest than Germany. So the cutoff would be December 2032. And in an average approach, we would get to 12% of world forest by 2050, which I still don't think it's kind of acceptable, because that would be just pathology data which would do this. And of course, again, the best solution would put this down. So what can we do? So one thing that many people think about, oh, I have slide, I have digital workflow, so now I can, I can just run all the deep learning models before I look at the slides, which actually would mean that you kind of input 100% of the whole slide and all the pixels are analyzed by the AI. Now that probably, or I would argue, that doesn't seem to make any sense to me. And what we actually look at is if you use two deep learning models, one that uses low resolution like here to detect the tissue, and the second AI is applied only on the tissue. Using two AI, you produce less CO2 than using the one AI on the whole tissue. And that is because the whole slide images mostly have much more absolutely useless pixels, but they have to go through the analysis. Another possibility, this is prostate cancer, because you can publish better than with kidney biopsies. If you would only detect the cancer and then run it on the cancer, you can even further reduce it. But I'm not sure whether this would be the meaningful workflow, because we sometimes don't know what all information is in there, so we wouldn't like to exclude some parts. But of course, if you think about this, just 3% of the data, the computation is much faster. So that could be also a very good option. So data reduction workflows are, in my opinion, very important. Just because we produce a lot of data doesn't mean we always have to use it. Um, the second thing is really this makes a lot of sense in pathology images, and maybe this is why pathology is particularly challenged. Here are the pictures from which AI developers use. And normally they download something from the internet, right? And this is what our radiologists do. But that's uncomparable of what we have in pathology, and that's why we are much more challenged with this than other disciplines. So our whole slide images are currently one of the biggest, if not the biggest, data files that we produce, maybe apart from whole genome analysis or something like that. So if you think about this, what we then thought is model size. So our idea came from a revision we received on one of our papers, where one of the reviewers told that we haven't used the most state-of-the-art deep learning model, and thereby our technology is not good enough. And I believe that this doesn't make sense, actually, because here is a really state-of-the-art, or was back then, now there are even better ones, deep learning network, which is also a very deep network. And this is a very simple network. And if you look at this, this is the accuracy. So the smaller network, look, is logarithmic scale tenfold reduced CO2, and even slightly more performative. So I would even argue, why to use this one? There's no sense in that, actually. So it doesn't mean that if there is a bigger, deeper model, that it for a specific task will perform better. And the second thing is, you can take actually these two models and make them smaller. It's called model pruning. So you kind of reduce their size so they are not that deep. And when you look at that, you can actually reduce it by 30% without losing accuracy, maybe very slightly. So it seems that that would also tell you that probably lots of the nodes there are even not relevant for the specific task. And this we did on a really concrete task for classification of renal cell carcinoma. Okay, so this is nice, but how can we do that? How can we develop models based also on our carbon footprint? And we really and there was very little approaches for that. And recently there was one nice editorial here from Loic, and they said, well, light bulbs have energy ratings, so why can't AI chatbots? Because all of you who now ask whatever Perplexity or ChatGPT or whatever, you're just using lots of energy and water. And the question is, it's comes somewhere, and I'm not sure how relevant it is. But of course, as long as it's cheap or even for free, then people will use it. So they propose that if AI chatbots would kind of show their energy consumption, then probably users could kind of switch to those models that are more energy efficient, right? And that could again drive industry to try to use solutions that are more energy efficient and more sustainable. And this is what we try to do to help this development. We ask, how can we develop a metrics that would not only consider performance, which is currently being done. So for example, for diagnostic performance, we use area under the receiver operating curve, AUROC, but I would also consider carbon footprint. And this is where we came up with this first proposal, what could be used, and we called it environmentally sustainable performance, or ESPER, ESPER score, which considers the performance. And this is, kind of, we put a stronger weight on performance. And then we actually calculate also the carbon footprint of this. And it's done in a way that this cannot be zero. And then we also included one metrics, which probably would require a lecture on its own, because what we have to consider here in medicine, and I will come back to that also a little bit, is, well, we have different tasks in medicine, and when we have a task, uh, that will predict cancer treatment for a patient, or whether the patient should get immunosuppression or not, the consequences of slightly reduced performance just to save a little bit CO2 could be detrimental and lead to even more CO2 because the patient would get a wrong diagnosis. So that's why we kind of try to include a weighting factor here. So if you have a task where it seems that, the medical task is so important, and the consequences would be so severe, so we can actually reduce the relevance of CO2 potentially even to zero. But if the task is in a way where this doesn't make a lot of sense, so for example, if you would use an AI to optimize your workflow, probably if there will be one biopsy that will be misorganized in your daily workflow, that will not make a lot of sense, but you might reduce lots of CO2 by using a more meaningful model. So this is how we try to kind of build this up. And then what we also did is what we call future projection, is that most people only consider training because you do the training, so you know how much you produce. But what is more important, in our opinion, is future projection, because for most models that we developed, after 1 or 2 years of use, you produce more CO2 than the training did. So this is what we kind of included here, is that you also include the use of this model, right? Okay, so again, this is the weighting factor, which we kind of currently set to 0 to 1, and I have no numerical clue how to really make this. I think this is more of an ethical, political discussion there. Okay, so what we propose is that now you can use this metric and to guide the development of a new deep learning model. So first of all, you should think about setting the weighting factor, right? So if it's workflow stuff, it's different weighting factor than if it's predicting treatment. And of course, we don't currently have guidance for that. So this is very open. And then you can start thinking about various approaches. And in this study, we did several aspects. Like you can start analyzing which optimal resolution of the patches you could use for both the training and then inference. Then you can test various models to see which perform best, and then you can go for model optimization. And then, of course, you can argue, oh, but if I do so much development, I use so much CO2 by training that it will outweigh then the inference of this model. And then also, when you infer the data on real, daily routine, we even tried some experiments, which I found interesting, is that you don't have to input all the data in there. So we try to kind of downsample the amount of data that goes to the model. And then you can project the deployment and see how much CO2 you produce. Okay, so one solution towards more sustainable deep learning training is which resolution you use. And you can see it here. So actually, if you use this smallest resolution, of course, so this resolution, you will get the best ESPER. So this is the best performance while having the lowest CO2. So the best model would be 225 pixel edge length and 256 micrometer. So this is what seems to be the best to be used. And thereby you can now see, if you would just look at CO2, then of course the highest resolution produces most CO2. But if you add ESPER and performance, you can then decide which one would be the most reliable to use. So this is another thing, and this is for me very interesting, and I cannot explain it, but because I would have expected something else. So what we did here is we didn't feed the model when it's inferring. So when we use it in clinical practice, we either we use different type of amount of data that come into the model. So here you have 100 percent of patches. So everything went in, then we just downsample random 50%, and then we get to 10%. So what you see here, and that's actually interesting, we did two different tasks. The one is classification of the three main renal cell carcinomas, which is very easy task also for pathologists. They are very clear to distinguish. And then we used our previously published model that kind of classifies the three main things you can see in kidney transplant, which is rejection, other disease, or no disease. So what you see here is that this is the performance, and you see that and this is here is the amount of data you use. So because the RCC classification is so easy, even already with 10%, so even one, well, maybe two patches, you get to perfect performance. And that is because, these cancers are often quite homogeneous, and you can classify whether it's clear cell, papillary, or chromophobe very easily. So that works pretty well, and I could somehow explain that and understand that. But what I understood less is, of course, predicting transplant rejection is much harder task. So we even get only to nearly 0.8 performance. We don't get up. But if you look here, it didn't make big difference between using 25, 30% of data to 100. And I actually always look at the whole biopsy to understand whether and which type of rejection there is. So this was really kind of surprising to us, and we cannot completely explain this. And then this is just the performance of the model. And then if you look at the ESPER, then you realize that, okay, so actually the best ESPER probably indeed for RCC would be here. So only using the, I don't know, 15% of data. And similarly here, you can see which one has the best performance. So this is interesting. I would be a little bit careful at the moment to not input all data, but I think this requires further analysis. So how can you do that? If you benchmark a new model, we not seldom use quite a large number of models to understand which might be the best one for a specific task. And then if you have 19 models, let's just say you do, actually it's 20 because we termed the first model 0, which I don't know whether that's mathematically correct. Anyhow, so you can analyze the performance or the CO2. But if you look at that and try to do that, how do you select which one is the best? And this is one of the area where iASPER can help you. And actually, it will select the best model, which is nearly as performative as this one. So you see the difference is not really that big, but it has much less CO2Q as this one. So you will get a completely different result as if you would either only look at performance or carbon footprint. And similarly, sometimes it can happen that you have models that perform very similarly. And also there, it's hard to just, select which one is the better, and ESPER can help you to do this. So here is one experiment that we did, and we did this for the renal cell carcinoma classification as a task example. This is way how you could develop a new model for pathology. So here, the first approach is you just look what's published in literature. Yeah, most high-ranking papers use CLAM. So you just use CLAM, train your model, and then use it for 5 years. This is the CO2. What would you use if we calculated the amount of renal cell carcinomas, and then this is where you get. Now, if you would just look what is published, or actually train various models, and then decide based on ESPER and not just performance, then you would actually use a different model, which is transmil, right? And thereby you will, by deployment, already spare 7%. Might seem little, but if you think about very large scales, it's still 7%, and you didn't did anything different. And then what you can do, you can start actually testing while developing the best option you have. This will result to more CO2 while testing, but at the end, you will actually have a much better performative model. So at the end, you will actually produce much less CO2. So it seems that it pays off to pay attention and try to develop a model not just based on performance. There are some publications which kind of try to calculate or calculated how much CO2 will kill a person. So I don't know whether that's really true, and I believe it's very hard, but we just took and cited this paper and kind of calculated and make this graph. And this graph shows you that how many usages you need to kill a person, right? So if you are in Norway or Sweden, you can do a lot of analysis till you kill a person based on the CO2. In France as well, but the issue is I'm not sure whether nuclear power is really as green as we would like to. And Germany is here, so we can't do a lot to do this. So this is just one very strange thing. And of course, if you look at that, really huge amount of usages and one person by 2100, so maybe not that relevant. But since these metrics were kind of published, we tried to calculate this as well. So now where we get is also, I don't think that this is just about metrics and numbers. And we are more and more, tackled with ethical issues. And this is something what Christina Ricci, as bioethicist in this area, proposed, that the relationship between technology and ecology will be a defining feature in the ethics of 21st century, and it starts. And what she also proposes, and I like that because we see that just with metrics like carbon footprint or ESPER, we don't know how to set the weighting factor. And she proposed some aspects like that you have to always think about health, justice, and resource conservation when you make the decision whether it's meaningful or not to develop and even apply such tools. Yeah, so what we are now doing, we're also interested in kind of data transfer because this is even more enigmatic than computational costs. So we are now working on ecological consequences and costs and carbon footprint of sending data around the world. It's also because we do that a lot ourselves. So we are interested what it means. And I hope I will be able to present you the data in some future. But one interesting thing is that after very long search, we were able to find some map which helps us to understand where the underwater cables are, to understand how we can send data from Europe to US and back, and what this means, and so on and so on. So this is also very interesting, um, um, and hope that I will be able to tell you more about that in the future. Yeah, so I hope that when we start to think about this from the beginning, we can take away the hype and just put the DL cycle there and then make deep learning work right from the beginning and not just drive us by the hype of what all might be possible, which is of course also important to analyze, but directly think about how to make this work in a sustainable manner. So thank you very much. Sorry for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
That was really awesome. I could have some questions, but I want to give other people a chance. So I'll let them go first. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mazi,
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. As always, an amazing talk. I have two questions. I put them out there and you can decide which one you want to answer. One of them is with the DeepSeek coming out, has that changed the way you see approaching developing models, like as in terms of making them more efficient? The other question
I
I
will
had.
ask that directly, if I may. So this is very not nice from me, but I thought when the data on DeepSeek came out, I said I would have told you if you would have asked me before. So I believe this is just important to think about smart solutions and how to make this happen. And I don't think, honestly, that for what we need for pathology diagnostics, that going the bigger, the larger is currently the way forward. However, with DeepSeek, one has to be careful because the training costs were different. But I'm not sure whether we exactly know what are the inference costs, because they run a structure which might actually, at the inference side, I don't know how much it costs. And I heard some aspects where they told that actually the inference is not that much more efficient. So this has to be analyzed, head to head, what is better. And that is what I believe we need to see. Okay, we can reduce the training, but then if something is used for 10 years and it's not that efficient, then we need to balance that. But I think this is not being done yet, and definitely not in medicine as far.
Great. If I can ask my second question about that slide of yours with random sampling. So is it possible that when you change the question, then the approach will be fundamentally different? Like cancer, no cancer, RCC, no RCC is much simpler to answer than if the question is, can you grade this cancer,
Of
where you need
course, this is, I showed you, this is very easy to answer. It's absolutely dependent on the task. But the really surprising thing was we actually used the whole slide images of resection specimens of renal cell cancer, and some of them have still normal tissue there. And we used random sampling just to make it meaningful. And still 10% was already sufficient to get nearly to the best performance. And very similar, it was for renal transplant, and that was classification. That was not cancer, yes, no, and that was not, there was like rejection, no rejection, complete, and other disease. So that's already more complex. And even there, it was like 25%. So it's much more than in RCC, but still much less than I would guess as a pathologist. We always tell, make 10 sections and look all of them, and then you see something. The overall performance did not improve that much. But we then have to go into detail, also for the future to see positive and negative predictive values. So that's lots of open questions for us at this result as well. I cannot fully explain it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And there's some great comments in the chat, that people who really liked your talk. One thing I thought is, how much is this, has anybody predicted how much it could actually raise the temperature? I know that people look at, models and how much we need to cut back and things like that. And they're saying now that we're not going to meet the target on that. Has anybody looked at AI and how much it's going to contribute to that?
Well, that is what we now try to do for pathology. And I am, there are some people who try to calculate this for, things like ChatGPT, but I am not, and now some companies showed, some training data, how much they computational time they used, so you can calculate how much CO2 it produced, and some also said how much inference is costing. But I am now that I think there were some preprints when I looked last time, but I don't think it's completely known on global scale, also because it's so variable, that I don't think there are data set outside probably of the large companies that would be able to realize that. Even we know, I don't know how many slides you do in US. Actually, we had some data from Joe Leonard's, who also calculated it somehow, but we don't know how much you guys in Canada do slides. So this was all extrapolation. So also our study extrapolates a lot. And this is one of the things for me, is to first try to, start gathering data that maybe before were not relevant, but for such calculations might be relevant. But we try to do these models in a way that you and your center can take this model and calculate for yourself. Okay, I have this energy mix.
Okay.
I will use these models and I have this much slides. So how much do I produce, right? And maybe that's already helpful, because I now know that many also universities, at least in Europe, start to think about this a little bit, and they are asking for, how to do this and whether there is some metrics and something like that. So maybe it will help a little bit.
That's helpful. Yeah, I know. Yeah, so you just basically don't know the how it's going to translate across everybody's practice, but for your practice, that's helpful though. That's really helpful. Well, I think Sam had a question, and then Richard Levinson had something. So Sam, you want to?
Yeah, uh, thank you for the talk. It was definitely a very interesting topic of research. Um, I'm curious to know how that the ISPER score, how that correlates with other measures of model complexity. So we have number of parameters, but if we increase, like how does it compare if we add another if we add more ResNet blocks versus if we add 1,000 decision trees or something like that. So if we have different types of those models, what is the cost of adding complexity? And
So what this was in our initial study. We actually tested and benchmarked, I think, some 40 models. So we didn't do machine learning. We only focus on deep learning. So we didn't do, this decision trees, forest, or all these things. We only focus on the models that have been somehow published and were available in repositories for image analysis, from very shallow to very deep. And that is the first thing, is that for all this deep learning, it's important the amount of pixels and not the size of the whole slide image in megabytes, because that differs very much. But for the CO2, it's more important the pixels than the megabytes. So that's the first thing. That's why the data size is very important to reduce this. And the second thing is, it was logarithmic how shallow the model was, the less CO2 it produced. And then if the question is, however, if you are able to, and that is what I also meant. So for example, if you use a model at low resolution, which means very small pixel image, to detect the tissue using a simple AI tool, and that will automatically outline the tissue, and then apply your AI model, it will produce less CO2 than if you apply the model on the 100% whole slide image, which means that combining more AI to make a more efficient workflow can still reduce the costs. If you're now thinking about, okay, I have a model and I want to add something on that, that's actually the longer your computation will take, the more CO2 you produce. Maybe this is also easy if you don't have carbon tracker or something like that. Normally this is equal, which also then means it's not one-to-one, but also means costs. Because you should pay for the electricity. We don't in universities. Maybe that would be interesting. Does any one of you have to pay for electricity of your institute? Because we don't, and we don't even have to pay for our GPUs that are in the server room. So actually no one cares, because you don't have to pay for that. You will get actually this cost somewhere back, but it's so hidden that no one understood this. This is maybe one of the issues. But the more complex you do the model, if you add anything on it, then it will just get more complex, and it will burn more electricity. So this is maybe, I don't know if this was exactly your question. If not, please specify. But this is what we saw, right?
yeah, that's pretty much what I was wondering, especially in the case of models which are um, what is the term? So like like an XGBoost model is not just one model, but it's an assemblage of multiple models working in tandem. So like, what is the cost of adding
Yeah,
more complexity there? And then how does that relate to other measures which have already exist for reducing model complexity? Um, so like
exactly.
a L2 norm or some like, just reducing the total model complexity in order to just get a better, a more robust model. So I think I would definitely be very interested to see about getting this type of score, something that I could integrate into my own workflows, just because I believe, if you can do the same results with a simpler model, it's
It's
probably going to be better. Just
more energy efficient, it's faster, and actually it thereby produces less CO2. So I wouldn't know why not do that, right? So I think we need more research on that. And I believe we were a long time in a situation where resources didn't make any, were not an issue. There was always water, there was always electricity, but now we see everything gets more costly, and we see that the resources likely will not be available at this amount, and therefore, you know, why not think about it, because it will be easier, faster, and thereby also more sustainable. So we will be happy to. The model is actually available at GitHub, so you can have a look if you need some help with implementation. I'm pretty sure we can help with that, because this is what we would like to have, is if you use it, whether and how it will help you. What I don't know, and that's maybe interesting, is we haven't tested it for machine learning, like as you said, XBoost and so on. So I also don't know whether these models, which computational resources and hardware you should use for that, whether their GPU is also better, or which GPU, and how to do the computing. So I have to be honest, one of our deep learning models, when we started with that, it took 2 days to run a whole slide image. And then with changing the code, now it takes 2 hours. So that's also kind of optimizing the workflow of the deep learning model for training or inferring can make a huge difference as well.
yeah,
So I
thank
had
you for
I had a couple of questions, if I can jump
I
in.
think it's always funny that from which areas you always join in, Richard.
Well,
I always envy
I
you.
think the giant pig behind me is a good comment on this topic. Um, so one question is, and it has to do more with the sort of the U.S. model. How much does it cost in dollar amounts to analyze a slide? How can these companies charge, and so companies have to charge to make a profit? How can they do that? What about reimbursement? All of these things. It's way too deep a question, but just how much do you think it costs to actually analyze a slide in dollars
Yeah.
or
So
yuan?
so actually this is a question I made 1 year ago, because when we had computational time, we had electricity. So I said, well, next to CO2, we can actually calculate the price.
Mhm.
But honestly, calculating the price is much more complicated than CO2. And that because if you look more into detail into electricity price, you will see that it fluctuates currently so much over each day that it is very big difference. And this is something we can think about in the future. So for example, here in Germany, it will be much more sustainable and cheaper to calculate everything when there is sun, because we have so many people that have solar panels. So the price when it's sunny over day is much smaller than in the night. So I cannot tell you, because it is a big range based on when you will calculate this. So that's why it's actually easier in CO2. So that's why we at the end ended with CO2, because we wouldn't know when to calculate this. So yeah, okay, you can tell, as a pathologist, I would like to have the AI real time. So when I do the diagnosis, so probably in Germany it would be during the day from 7 till, I don't know, 7 till 7, whatever. But even there, the calculation was the variability was so high that we actually stopped doing this
Fair
for the
enough.
price.
My second question is, what is the carbon cost of training a pathology resident?
It depends on whether that's whether he likes cars or whether he likes nature. And if this person will have a garden and plant several trees and not drive a car, then it's much more sustainable.
Yeah.
So this is another question where you will realize how many variables there are. But please don't understand me wrong. We don't do this because we want to show that this is bad. We do this to make this work, right? To find solutions how to make this work and how to make this more sustainable. Because maybe I'm a lazy pathologist, but it is my great interest to use AI to facilitate the workflows.
Sure, but the huge dilemma is that you or any pathologist can look at a slide and come up with a diagnosis in sometimes a fraction of a second at virtually zero cost, and yet these models are plundering the environment and killing everything on Earth to come up with the same answer. Why is there this huge difference in performance between humans and AI?
That is what I am very fascinating, and that's called neuromorphic computing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is now the new area also tackled by our university here, where actually people try to learn how our brains immensely efficiently process and analyze data. Sorry, I have to take a.
I'll go in and get some coffee now.
Yeah, but these are really interesting. This has been a great lecture, and I think it gives us a lot of food for thought.
Yeah, sorry for that, but if the boss calls, you have to take it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so there I have a very clear answer as well, because, for example, in Germany, we have the least pathologists or second least number of pathologists per inhabitants in Europe. And we are not getting less cases, and the cases are not getting easier. So to actually manage the standard workflow, we need support systems. So it is not that I would, so where I see the main application of AI is to take away the cumbersome, for example, quantitative tasks in pathology, which is, for example, grading prostate biopsies for cancer. If you did 24 biopsies and did all the 3+4, 4+3, all the length, all the percentages, then you know what I'm talking. That is, you kind of can spare 20, 30, 40% of time. Also, quantification of cancer biomarkers. These are also the first areas where this will be implemented. And that is where it will spare you time so that you as a pathologist can focus on really more complex cases which need lots of data integration. So this is where I see it coming mainly, and thereby it's not really in a competition to each other. So I currently, in the mid to short term, I don't see that AI would anyhow replace what we do on the large integrative scale, but we will support our efficiency. And this is how I think about it. What will happen on a long-term scale, I don't know, but this is my thoughts to that.
Great. Well, any last questions? I know people probably have meetings after this, some people. So but this has been awesome. And thank you so much for presenting. And we'll post this later. And if you want to continue discussion offline, then we can definitely do that or in later meetings.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, all. listening. Thank you. Thank you, Brad.
Great. Thank you so much for presenting. That was awesome. And thanks to everyone for coming. Y'all take care. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.